All right, so you want to be a crucifer, a cross bearer. What a wonderful joy. Before we even start worship, it's important for you to know that your tool, banner bearers have the banner, torch bearers have torches, acolytes have their tapers. As the crucifer, you have the processional cross. And in our congregation is positioned behind the altar. So even when you're going to get the processional cross for your job, for your ministry, you need to go reverently. So Miss Susan, if you would go just in a way that you don't have to be crawling, but we don't want to run. So if you could go in a way that you're recognizing that you're in the holy space, that we don't want to, it's called profane, to make people have this image that we don't want to plant in their minds. So we're reverently going in, getting the processional cross in a way that even now, Miss Susan's holding it upright instead of using it like we're a knight jousting or something like that. And then she's going to come and she's going to go down the side aisle in order to go back to the narthex for us to start the procession. So now we're back in the narthex before worship begins, and you as the crucifer are the leader of the procession. You can, while waiting, because the processional cross is pretty heavy, you can have it sitting on the ground. But you do need to be mindful that the Chi Rho, the first two letters in the name, the title, Christ, are facing away from you. If you see the Chi Rho back here, then you got to turn it around. Make sure that you're always as if you're ready to process, because you are the front of the processional. It's very important that you remain as upright and still as you can, so that you're not swaying back and forth, you're not crossing your legs or crossing your arms, trying to, it's very important that as best as you can, that you stand upright and face forward, because you're the one saying the cross of Jesus leads us into worship. He died on the cross to pay the penalty for our sin, to enter into, to share our sufferings and our sorrows, and to fulfill all righteousness. And that's why the cross leads the way into worship. And it's an empty cross, because Christ is risen. He is risen indeed, and he lives in the hearts of all who would receive him. So he's our strength, and Holy Spirit leads us to worship God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We would note that in our church, we have what's called a Christus Rex in the front. That's a Christ the King that says the Christ who died for us on the cross is raised from the dead. Now the cross and death are behind him. He no longer dies. And he, being joined to us by God's will in holy baptism, we now have the joy of the resurrection and the empty cross in our lives. And even though we'll die, unless Jesus comes again before we do, death can't hold us. And we, like Jesus, will be raised up from the dead with him for everlasting life. All of that is a part of your job to communicate. Torchbearers have a lot of responsibility, but so do you as the crucifer. So the opening song begins. When you come through, it's important again not to bang your processional cross on the door, and you can hold it as high as you want, but you want to make sure that you're holding it high enough where it's off the ground, but low enough that you're not swaying it and can't keep it at that spot. You want to have it in a place where you can keep it for the whole of the procession and until you're dismissed. So when you come into the chancel area, you want to pause for just a moment to say, I'm coming into a holy space. Just for a moment, and then you'll step up into the chancel. Make sure you step far enough where the acolytes can get past you and the torchbearers can come and be next to you. That's a perfect place where Miss Susan is. She basically stepped up and took a step and maybe a little bit more so that there's space here for the acolytes to get through and the torchbearers to get through. And she is waiting patiently. I, as pastor, will be here. And once the acolytes get all the candles lit, sometimes there's 4, sometimes there's 5, sometimes there's 19 because of the candelabra being lit. But as soon as the acolytes are done, then I will nod to you and let you know that you can turn. And remember again, you're going behind the altar. And that's a very important place, so you don't want to run. And it's very important that you put the processional cross, like the torches, straight down, because you don't want to have to force it, because if you have to force it, it'll bang and be a distraction. And you want to make sure, as Miss Susan has, that the Christ, the Chi-Rho there in the middle, is pointing out to the congregation. And when we have everybody in place, the Crucifer also sits in the chancel area. The pastor, the torchbearers, and the Crucifer. And Miss Susan, I'll share with a smile that you gave us to see, it's natural for us to go that way, but you'll actually, as the Crucifer, you'll wind up sitting on this other side. See, it's very natural. So she'll put the cross in, and then she'll go straight on forward, because the preacher, the pastor, sits on this side with one torchbearer, and the Crucifer on this side with the other torchbearer. Now, the other thing that the Crucifer gets to do, being the cross bearer, is that when it's time for communion, Miss Susan, as the Crucifer, you'll come to the front of the altar. And Miss Cassie, you might want to step a little bit this way, because Miss Susan, what you're going to do is grab the 2 front corners of what's called the fair linen that covers, and you'll hand those to me. And I will deal with the fair linen, while then Miss Susan, as the Crucifer, takes off what's called the pall and sets it just right here in the front. There we go. And then she'll take off what's called the purificator, and she'll fold it nicely to remember that the grave clothes of Jesus were folded nicely. She'll put it there with the pall. Having done that, she steps to the side of the altar, and again, does not want to be a distraction, and reverently waits there for me to do the things that I do as pastor. Now, once communion is going on, sometimes the Crucifer helps to gather the empty communion glasses. Sometimes we have others who help us. But if you help to gather the empty communion glasses right behind the one who's sharing the full communion glasses, then again, you can receive the empty cup and say to the people as they have given you their cup, you can say, God bless you, or you can just be quiet and smile at them and ask a little prayer of joy on them. So sometimes the empty glasses, sometimes somebody else will do that. But then when communion is concluded, then I will nod for Miss Susan, our Crucifer, to come, and she will put the purificator back onto the cup, the chalice, and then she'll put the pall back over the top, because it provides for us a remembrance of the covering of Jesus, who poured out his life for us and is present at this table. And at this point, I will have done this with the bread, and then I will unfold again the fair linen. I'll find the front 2 corners, hand them to her. I'll lift it up, and she kind of guesses how much space she needs, and she'll make sure that this fair linen does not hang over the front, but it's pulled back in a way that is nice and crisp. And then we'll just kind of go in the same direction. I'll come this way, and she'll come this way, and she'll grab the processional cross and then just come right on around and assume her position at the beginning of the recessional. So everybody's coming into place, the acolytes, the torchbearers, the banner bearers. I myself will come to this place, and ideally, Crucifers, you're looking at the congregation, because like Brooks Melton is an expert at this. He just stays totally looking forward as the Crucifer, and he can just kind of feel. He just kind of feels when I start moving towards him, out of his peripheral vision, he can feel that I'm moving towards him. And when I move towards him, I'll nod also, but he doesn't even have to look at me. He can feel me moving towards him, and so that's when, Crucifer, you begin to lead the way. If we have torchbearers, they'll be right behind you, but you don't have to worry about them or anybody else behind you in the procession. But when you come out, then, with the procession, just before you get to the exit from the sanctuary, you'll stop about right there, because you want to leave room, and turn around and face the congregation, because you want to leave room for the banner bearers, the torch bearers, at the last, the acolytes to be able to get around you without bumping into the furniture and all. And we've come to the end of worship, and I said, in the strength of Christ and lead of Holy Spirit, let's go in peace and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God. I want to encourage you not to race back up through the middle, but to go ahead and turn and come into the narthex. Remember, bend it down so that you don't bang the door, and then just wait patiently over here in the corner until there's a reasonable gap for you to go back in and place the processional cross again reverently and straight down behind the altar in its stand. Great job, Crucifers!